Phew. So that is everything on board composition and rules. The next slider we're going to talk through is around advanced round configuration. Um, we're going to skip past Thunderbeam compatible paperwork. At some point in the near future, we've still got some legacy customers that are using this. At some point in the near future, this setting will disappear entirely. It's not useful anymore, so I won't dwell on it today. The next item is around you snooze, you lose. This is a very founder-friendly thing, so you should absolutely, unless you're forced otherwise by investors, you should leave this as yes. Effectively, what this means is um, if you have investor consent switched on within your funding round, and we'll come to those in a minute, if they're switched on, then by default, if you snooze, you lose is no, then when you ask for investor consent from all of your investors, you have to wait until you get to over 50% of investor shareholdings committing yes to a vote. And if people are away on holiday or they're ill in hospital or whatever, and they don't vote or they can't vote, then you can't assume that they're abstaining. You can't assume anything of their kind of inaction. And it creates a bit of a burden on founders. It creates a hurdle to get over that 50%. When you switch on you snooze, you lose, which is now the default on the platform, it means that if you don't hear from investors within 2 weeks, you can assume that they are, you can assume that they are happy to consent to an action. So it just gives much more flexibility on those consent items. Broadly, it means usually that after 2 weeks, everybody who hasn't replied is de facto consenting to something. As long as more than 50% of people haven't said no to a specific action, then you can go ahead. So it's powerful and it's very founder friendly, and it stops those kind of slowing down situations where people just aren't replying to consent. Funding round direct and loan treatment. So there are lots of ways that investors like to kind of insist founders deal with loans, and our paperwork gives you lots of optionality here. The first item on the list is, oh, and by the way, if you don't have a director's loan account, this doesn't matter in the slightest. It really doesn't matter. The default on the platform is, I believe, silent. So this means that the paperwork is silent. We don't mention director's loan account. It's kicked down the line in terms of how that loan is treated, so it's not explicitly mentioned. The next item, and this is the most founder friendly, is that you can repay any director's loan account from investment monies. Broadly, this means, say you're raising £100,000 and you've got a £10,000 director's loan. If you manage to have this setting on the platform through a funding round, then this means that you can repay that £10,000 from the £100,000. By the way, you shouldn't do that with EIS funds. There are esoteric rules on this, but you can repay directors' loan accounts from SEIS monies. You're not allowed to repay loans from EIS money. So make sure you're not tripping over that one. The third item is slightly less founder friendly, but still better than the last item. This is around whether this basically allows you to repay a director's loan account from free cash flow, but not from investment money. So broadly, when your company reaches profitability and you've got 10 grand of profit in the bank, you could repay your director's loan account from that £10,000 without any other authority. You're already authorized in the paperwork if your investors sign up to this. You're not allowed to repay in this third scenario. You're not allowed to repay the director's loan account from the investment money at all. The last item is capitalized, which is the most investor friendly and therefore the most founder unfriendly. And this basically means that you will be capitalizing your director's loan into the company equity within this funding round. Broadly, what it means is you've got a £10,000 loan. You're currently fundraising at 1.5 million. You've got to take your director's loan out, and this is a cashless transaction, but you convert your director's loan into equity, into £10,000 equity, but you do so at that 1.5 million valuation. So usually that's really unpleasant for founders. It's the least founder friendly of these options. Some investors, like SFC, for example, they will insist that you do it. Most investors will allow you to keep either silent or can be repaid from cash flow. If you don't have director's loan, this item is incredibly irrelevant. The next item is indicating whether you'll work in the business full time. We've already had a setting somewhere in the settings around whether you can have outside interests or not, but this is slightly different. This is basically confirming that you will be a full-time employee or not. For most founders, the answer is yes, I'm going to be a full-time and more employee. But sometimes you will, keep doing a day job. You'll close the funding round. You'll do 2 days a week as a contractor to keep the lights on. In which point you're probably not full-time in the business, and you would indicate that here. Funding round investor consents. There are a couple of different options here. So within the shareholders agreement, if you indicate that you either want minimal or light or full investor consents, then within the shareholders agreement, there will be investor consents in place. Broadly, this means that if you want to undertake certain items, then you need to ask the consent of your investors. And normally it means you need at least 50% of shares owned by investors to consent to that action. Now, we've already spoken about you snooze, you lose, which helps you get around that a little bit. But broadly, that's true, that if 50% of investors disagree with an action, 50% of shareholdings owned by investors disagree with an action, you just can't undertake it. There's 4 different settings here, and it gets a little bit confusing, but none means that there are absolutely no investor consent at all. There's literally none. It's expunged from our paperwork. It's really unusual for investors to accept these. But that is, we had lots of requests for founders saying, I just want no mention of investor consents. Well, if that's the case, then none is the setting for you. Far more usual is minimal. This doesn't include a consent schedule at the back of the shareholders agreement, but it does give some really, really minimal protections to shareholders to investors in certain circumstances where it's incredibly reasonable that those investors are covered. The next choice is light. This is not the full-on investor consents. This does include a consent schedule within your shareholders agreement, but it's paired back to what we think a reasonable minimum is. And then you come to full investor consents. There's quite a few sets of that's quite comprehensive. There's a lot there. If you want to see the difference on these 4 settings, what is probably worth doing is creating whatever version you want to look at. So if you want to know the difference between, I don't know, minimal and none, for example, you can create a set of paperwork based upon the minimal consents. You can then download the PDF, the shareholders agreement. You can then go in and set to none. You can download the PDF. You can load both in Word as a PDF, but then convert them to Word. And then you can do a compare of the 2 documents, and you can see the differences across those 2 documents. Like I say, none is absolutely 0 consents applying to investors at all. Minimal is our minimum viable set, but very, very thin. Light it has an investor consent schedule, which is, we think it's a minimal set of protections, assuming you want investor consents in place. And then full is everything. Full is what most of the SEIS and EIS funds would insist on. Phew. Include full warranties. And again, there's 2 choices here. There are, you can either accept all the warranties, or you can accept a kind of slimmed down version of warranties. You can't select warranties equals none because frankly, no investor would ever accept that. We do have an article on our platform. I'm not going to include a link to it here, but there is an article on our platform which walks through what is a warranty, what is a disclosure process, why does it matter. It's really important that you take the warranty and disclosure process seriously. If you don't, then in theory, your investor can sue you. Imagine, one of the warranties says, and I'm going to paraphrase, the company is not being sued for anything. Imagine your business is being sued for, I don't know, copyright infringement or whatever. If you knew that and you didn't disclose it as a disclosure, then you could be sued for a breach of warranty. That has implications for you individually and for the business as a warrantor as well. And it's very unpleasant. Now, in reality, for startups, I've never once seen any founder be sued via a warranty claim. The reason is, most investors are putting £20,000, £50,000 into your business, and it's going to take an investor £50,000 to take you to court. So it's just disproportionately expensive to do so. Yeah, but for all of those reasons, I've never once seen somebody sued for a breach of contract under a warranty claim. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't take it seriously. What you should do is read our article on warranty and disclosure, and then walk through the warranty schedule. Make sure you've had a very strong coffee, but walk through that warranty schedule within the shareholders agreement and work out if any of those warranties apply to you. And what you do, you read each of the warranties in turn. And for example, one of the warranties will say, and again, I'm paraphrasing, something like the business is not being sued by anybody. If you are being sued, then it's a pretty strong indication you need to disclose the details of that. If you're not being sued, then you don't need to do anything. You don't need to create a disclosure. You don't need to write anything. You can just skip past that warranty and sleep safely at night. Those are warranties and disclosures. Company information rights. There's a few choices here. Broadly, this gives you an obligation to update your investors on a routine basis. And there are a couple of choices here. You can click absent, which means you're never obliged to give your investors any updates at all. Or there's monthly, quarterly, and yearly. And these are indicating, quarterly, for example, means that you need to update your investors every quarterly with an update. As an investor myself, I want updates. I don't want them monthly. I think that's a distraction for you. And honestly, I'm not going to read a monthly update. I think yearly is a long time in a startup. I think that's too long. So I think quarterly is the perfect cadence. It's just long enough for something interesting to happen, and it's not too long that the company could have disappeared in that year. As a founder, I would, as an investor in startups myself, I would urge you as a founder to update your investors anyway. I think, if you're going to come to do another funding round, investors are much more likely to invest if you've been updating them. And also, you might have asks of your investors. You might want introductions into a certain type of partner or customer type. You might, you might be looking for a fractional CMO or a CTO or whatever it happens to be. If you ask your investors, they are very motivated usually to help you. If you don't ask your investors, they can't help you. So I think, quarterly is a lovely balance here. For some reason, lots of founders get animated on this one, and they're like, no, we don't want an obligation to update founders, and we don't want that at all, in which case you can select absent. The next item is around including certified B Corporation compliant articles. I'm not going to go too much into B Corp itself. B Corp is quite a big movement. There are lots of for good, mission-driven businesses who, have a purpose beyond just making profit, and they will want to bake that into their kind of essence of being via something called B Corp. You will probably know whether you want to be B Corp compliant or not. If you do, then you can indicate that here. We don't do the heavy lifting. Believe me, B Corp is a lot of work. We don't do the heavy lifting, but what we do, we make life a little more straightforward. We include a section, it's right at the back of the articles, which make your articles of association B Corp friendly. So they include the wording that you need to include within your B Corp in your articles to be B Corp friendly. You've still got to do all of the heavy lifting yourself, but it hopefully takes a little bit of pain away. You will hopefully know whether you want to be B Corp friendly or not. If you don't know, take a look, and yeah, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. Finally, nearly there on this page, penultimately, we come to leaver provisions. Broadly, there are three choices here. Lots of founders, again, get animated on this one. Broadly, this means that if you select none here, it means that the shares you own in the business, so you might own 100% of the shares pre-funding round if you're a sole founder. It means that even if you close a funding round, you take on £1 million today and you quit the business tomorrow, you're going to still own, whatever you end up owning, 80% of the shares after a funding round or whatever. So if you leave leaver provisions equals none, there's no vesting attached to your shares. no matter what you do, no matter how you leave, no matter how quickly that happens, you will own all of your shares if you quit. It is really unlikely that your investors, if they are in any way sophisticated, will accept that. And I've kind of indicated why they won't want to accept that. If you do £1 million funding, close £1 million funding round today, and you quit tomorrow, I, as an investor, don't want you to own your 80% of the shares that you own post dilution. It's just completely unreasonable. Therefore, you fall back to one of two different types of vesting. These are the defaults on the platform. So our default is standard. We've got an article which we link to here, which gives details around what that exactly entails. But broadly, our standard terms, it breaks you down into either a very bad lever, at which point you're going to lose all your shares, a bad lever, a voluntary lever, or a good lever. And so that's one side of the table. And then it has the period over which you leave. So if you leave within the first year, you're going to end up losing more of your shares than if you leave between, the second and third year, or third and fourth year, and so on. So the better type of lever and the longer you've been in the business, broadly, the more of your shares you keep. Any shares that you are losing, subject to this vesting provision, will be done using something called reverse vesting using deferred shares. So we will, or you will take a percentage, say you're going to lose 20% of your shares, for example. You take 20% of your shares and they are converted to deferred shares, which are broadly junk. Deferred shares don't vote, they don't get a dividend, they don't participate on an exit. So those shares are absolutely junk. And that's what vesting means. Our standard provisions we think are fair. You may want to tweak some of the percentages, or you may want to flip to BVCA. BVCA is the British Venture Capital Association. They have a standard set of share vesting. I think in our platform it is the shares vest for over 4 years with a 1-year cliff. So you earn nothing in the first year, then you accelerate that first year, and then it's pro rata up until the end. Once you've owned your shares, once you've vested over 4 years, you own all of your shares, and as long as you're not a very bad lever, then you retain all those shares, even if you quit. That is very much going to be a negotiation with your investors. Even if, no matter who your investors are, they will probably have a fixed view on this. The last item is a percentage shareholding required to allow an SSA change. Broadly, this means what percentage of your shareholdings need to vote in order to change that subscription and shareholder agreement. There is a caveat here, which is that if you are removing a right on anybody, or you're adding an obligation to them, they need to sign the subscription and shareholder agreement. So I don't think this is particularly useful. In most scenarios, in virtually all scenarios, if you're changing your subscription and shareholder agreement, then you're going to need 100% signature anyway, because the only reason you'd be changing that document is to either remove a right and protection from somebody, or increase an obligation on somebody, in which point they've got to sign the new document anyway explicitly.